Hello and welcome to the last of our UK RG conversations for now, perhaps. We are recording on Tuesday, 16th of June. I would like to introduce Annabel Campbell and Jacqueline Cox. Annabel Campbell is the head of exhibition and collection programs for the Crafts Council. She is responsible for the National Collection of Contemporary Craft, as well as professional development for curators. She has curated many exhibitions for the Crafts Council, Jeffrey Museum, and also with the V&A and the British Council. She has previously held roles at the British Museum, Museum of Reading, the V&A and the Jeffrey Museum. She is a visiting lecturer at Kingston University and the Royal College of Art, and jointly supervising doctoral research on diversity in craft practice. Jackie Cox is the keeper of the University Archives, and she's responsible for the official records of the University of Cambridge, a position she has held since 2000. So thank you very much for agreeing to talk to us today. We'll launch straight in with the first question to Annabel to start off, please. So we're talking about contemporary collecting or collecting reactively through this current crisis. So the question is, why do it? And what kind of stories did you want to tell?
Yeah, well, for the Crafts Council, we've always been a contemporary collection. So we've always had a policy that's looked at acquiring work within 5 years of making. And so we are always looking at kind of what to collect, why to collect it. And what became really clear at the start of this whole kind of pandemic was that making and craft was gaining this kind of new, broader place in people's lives. And so, and also it was obviously having an impact on everything and everybody. And so through kind of talking to colleagues, we were realizing that a lot of the artists that we work with were actually needing to change the way that they work, but also lots of really good opportunities were emerging. So we were at the point of looking at our acquisition policy anyway, at the time of lockdown. So it seemed just like the really, really important moment for us to think about how to document this through the collection. So looking at I didn't look at rewriting the policy. I looked at adding an addenda to the policy to enable collecting work kind of during this period that has a story to tell. So when I was looking at this, there was kind of three kind of key areas that were kind of emerging through talking to colleagues, talking to my colleagues in development too as well, who were looking at obviously fundraising for acquisitions and thinking about the stories we wanted to tell. So one of the key areas that we were interested in was, with the galleries closing, the fairs closing, museums closing, that there was a real loss of marketplace. And what emerged was the Artist Support Pledge on Instagram. And a lot of makers and the Crafts Council became involved in supporting this. And I mean, it's a really fascinating project, but it also was a really important way that artists and makers were adapting to the time and the marketplace. So one of the strands of our acquisitions was to raise money to acquire works via that strand of selling for artists. So that was about around the Instagram marketplace. The second one was around kind of making and makers and those kind of maker stories. And again, a lot of it was coming through social media. A lot of museums and galleries were creating assets for people to make at home. There was there's been lots of discussion about the kind of the well-being and the kind of beneficial aspects of making. So a second strand to the kind of the mini acquisition project was about documenting some of these stories through oral histories. So that was a second strand within the addenda. And then the third one was around how to support makers. And the organisation, the collection grew out of the organisation being an agency to support contemporary making, and right from the beginning, a really important way of supporting the sector, supporting makers, supporting the marketplace was to just buy work for a public collection. So really talking to a lot of people who support us to look at how we can commission makers. So to commission makers to make work that responds to how they are having to change their practice during this time, or to make work that is a response to the time that's going on, because contemporary craft and making has got a long history of being quite politically active, and the idea of craftivism and activism is kind of at the heart of contemporary craft practice. So that kind of was the kind of three strands that we were looking at for the policy. And then I did lots of we're all telling quite different but interrelated stories as well. And so we were looking at a kind of rapid response process to be able to acquire to do this. So that.
Jackie, how does that compare, or how does it contrast with the University Library's approach in your particular position as the archive?
It is quite different, really. I mean, I should begin by saying that this is actually an additional responsibility for me, because I'm the archivist for the university. So my main day job, of course, is taking in, appraising and collecting material that documents the official life of the university. And there are quite well established and recognised pathways there for material which is generated in the course of the university carrying out its main functions and activities to make their way through to the archives. That stuff will continue to come to us in the normal run of things. So the official story of how the university has responded to COVID-19 will be told. But it was considered important from fairly early on that a themed collection around the unofficial response of the collegiate university, and maybe more broadly the city, should also be catered for or should be thought about. And because I had some capacity, I guess, at home, in contrast with some of my colleagues who had other more pressing responsibilities, I think that's the main reason, it was given to me as a responsibility to try and make some headway on. So there've been quite a few contrasts, I would say, in terms of the genesis of this. I mean, it was thought we did have some precedents here because the University Library collected material relating to the Great War from 1915 onwards, which was an ephemera collection, leaflets dropped from aeroplanes, pamphlets, that kind of thing. And also and secondly, they also set up a themed collection around Brexit from around 2016 onwards, collecting flyers, lectural material associated with that. So they did have some precedents in terms of themed collecting. So this is in that vein. But I would say probably there are some similarities too, though, because actually the way people have responded, of course, has been about, in many ways, an emotional response to what's gone on. It has been about making as well as doing, and the material that we've begun to take in, some of it relates to how people are doing their day jobs differently, of course, but a lot of it is about how we're socializing differently, how we're feeling, how we're interacting with each other, how we're spending our leisure time. So there are some similarities as well.
Do you think that then, because you were saying about the obviously keeping the record of the official university response, but as part of this collecting, are you also documenting some of the student response?
Oh yes, because student responses don't come to us as part of the official archives unless unless they're taken in as part of some, I don't know, official piece of work required by a department or faculty. We do have records of student clubs and societies. They're not official records, but obviously student activity is represented there too. No, absolutely. I mean, one of the main challenges initially was, of course, to scope and frame a project that was going to be doable. You know, I mean, gosh, if we've learned anything, it's about having to be pragmatic and decide what's feasible in the circumstances we're in. You know, I mean, the project was given me like 2 weeks into lockdown, by which stage, of course, we were all stuck inside our homes and we're having to do all of this via meets technology, frame a project, draw up a workflow, consider how material was to be got to us, draw up some terms and conditions, think about what metadata we required in connection with whatever transfers. The plane was already off the ground and we were trying to work out how to fly it. So yeah, of course we would like student reactions as well as staff reactions, as well as reactions of the broader kind of Cambridge community. So, and indeed, we have had, you know, quite a good response from students.
I think you both touched on how existing collecting policy allowed for the collecting in this area already, either in the terms of the remit of the organisation as a whole or in terms of the precedents. So how did you go about formulating the collecting policy as it responded to the crisis now? And is it continuing to develop as you expected?
I mean, we framed it very, very broadly. We thought, what can we say? Should we just restrict ourselves to the collegiate university, well, actually that's only going to be kind of half the story for Cambridge. Let's see if we can reach out and do something that's more collaborative. Let's try and build a community archive if we can. Of course, the challenge immediately is how do you go about letting people know that's what you're going to do? I mean, communication is probably the single most important obstacle to get, or challenge to get the other side of, if you're going to launch something like this with no plan beforehand, or with no kind of run up to it, with no much advanced publicity. It's not really changed. I mean, it was framed at the beginning of April. It seems to be working okay, actually. We have periodic refreshes of the publicity to try to reach out to more people. And of course, the other thing to say is that there are a lot of people, of course, who are involved in the collegiate university who are townspeople. So they are, and then people know people. So, the word spreads like that. So I don't think our collecting policy has actually changed any. We've been going for a couple of months now. I don't know if Annabelle would say the same.
Yeah, I mean, our policy as it stood has, has some key criteria for what we would acquire, and so that was not changed at all, because then under there are kind of key kind of priority strands to acquire. What I was really keen to get in place before was, because I was about to be put on furlough as well, was also to get some kind of framework that other people could go with, that would make sure that work was acquired appropriately and responsibly, and had some guidelines for people outside the team to be able to manage that process. So what I did some kind of consultation with some kind of peers of other organisations that I knew had kind of rapid response collecting policies, and what they felt were the key aspects that they needed to have in place. So it was, kind of what I needed to do was outline the ambitions of these different strands that we'd identified, to then make sure that it referred back to our key policy, which is about innovation, excellence, and kind of key moments. Those are our kind of three core aspects of our contemporary collecting. And then add in about the biggest challenge was the decision-making process, because that is what was the most different, because usually we have an acquisition panel, and we meet 3 times a year and we look at things. And for this, not only is it about being at kind of rapid response, it's also about not being able to be there in person, because usually you wouldn't acquire anything unless you've actually seen it physically. But then also, possibly the acquisition being driven by someone, someone else outside either the organisation or the team as well. So trying to get some kind of key guidelines in for how to manage it responsibly was a key thing for me.
Yeah, and can I say, I mean, of course, issues to do with appraisal have been really, really challenging through all of this. I mean, likewise with archival material, you don't take something necessarily unless you've looked at it in advance, and unless it meets the collection criteria that you've drawn up in advance. And that's been, of course, quite difficult. And we can't look at physical material because we can't take physical material while the library is shut. We get people to describe what they have on offer. Sometimes they would send you a photo or something, and you might be able to make a selection on that basis. Some people haven't really asked whether you want it or not. They just kind of send it to you. And obviously, again, that was something to think about in advance. So we've adopted a kind of two-pronged or two-stage approach there. So we set out the areas we were interested in and the types of material we were interested in, and asked people to get in touch. Many of them do. And on the strength of those initial contacts, sometimes one can rule people out of scope immediately. But also the terms and conditions which govern the donation of all of this material includes within it a statement whereby, if on closer examination this material is found not to be part of our collecting remit, we won't keep it. And so again, and people see that at the point at which they upload their material to the shared drive where they can transfer their digital stuff. And if they don't like it, then that's their chance, of course, not to give us the stuff, because we might not take it. So there's a kind of two-stage process there to catch it all. But the other thing to say as well, I was thinking just further to what Annabelle was saying about policy, the thing to say with the archival stuff from the outset as well is that the Wellcome collection in London they did set themselves up as a kind of national coordinating institution. And so they have been collecting information all the way through this and producing a larger and larger and larger spreadsheet from archival collecting institutions across the country, in the hope that that can will avoid treading on each other's toes, duplicating effort, collecting the same kind of thing twice over. So there has been some national coordination, which is good. I mean, one thing I noticed when we were thinking about how we're going to do this was we looked at some of the online forms and collecting invitations that had gone out from institutions in the States, for instance. And there's no appraisal there at the point at which people give them stuff. There's just a form you fill in and off you go. We wanted to try to avoid that, really, and do a little bit of selecting beforehand to try and make it manageable, because ultimately, you know, you want to end up with stuff which you've got the rights to do something with long term, but also that's not going to be totally overwhelming, because I'm not sure how quickly we're going to be able to work through it, and indeed who's going to do that. And so to try to keep it manageable and not create these expectations you can't fulfill in the current circumstances. And let's face it, finances are only going to get worse, and staffing is only going to get smaller, and resources are only going to get fewer as the months go on.
Yeah, that one of the things that I was really mindful of was that to ensure that what was acquired did still make sense in the context of our collection, that it had a relevance, that obviously the key relevance for this moment was it being acquired during this kind of, the COVID-19 moment. But it needed to have a kind of have more stories to it than that as well, because I talked to various colleagues about how we didn't want to be looking back at over years of like the shelf of weird stuff that came in during that period in 2020 that we've never done anything with since. And so to kind of make sure that actually you are trying to future-proof as much as you can what you're acquiring in a rapid response framework around a particular moment. And also for us, for me as well, it's a challenge that, in the way that my colleagues in development have been talking to individuals to support this acquisition, because it is about buying works, this acquisition project, is that they were keen that, that these people giving the money, and it's not huge amounts of money, but they have a say in what can be acquired. So it's kind of trying to be very careful about, yes, we want to hear what these people who are supporting us financially would like to be us to acquire, but we really need to work with them to make the final decision, because we're thinking of the wider context, whereas the funders quite often are thinking about, just the moment. So there's been quite a lot of discussion just to get a process and a procedure that really works for everybody. To make sure that we've got some kind of rigor behind what we are acquiring and commissioning as well.
Very neatly, you've taken care of my next two questions, but if I may pose another one on top of this, I suppose, isn't that on top of the issues and developments in the crisis and the COVID-19 crisis, but I suppose are there do you see plans also to investigate areas around the Black Lives Matter demonstrations, which is kind of another social movement layered on top of the current situation?
Yeah, I mean, one of the strands of collecting at the UL is the identification and nomination of websites, for instance, for the UK Web Archive, which is run out of the British Library. So one of the strands of work has been to review the university's website, identify all those web pages which do directly relate to coronavirus, and make sure that they're captured. Of course, that work does now extend into BAME and Black Lives Matter responses as well, and the kind of equality and diversity as parts of the university, to see how they are, what kind of statements they're including, how they're changing over time as this area of activism has come around as well. Yes. We haven't yet anyway commissioned work, and I have to say that the material that we've taken thus far hasn't yet brought that angle of the experience to the fore, as far as I'm aware. That's not to say it won't. I mean, we're going to be collecting for a while yet, as long as this, frames our national and local and national international experience. We're going to be collecting the material in, but we haven't had any BAME students or members of staff approaches yet with their own specific take on their experience as BAME people of the coronavirus, but that's not to say it won't happen. So we started with websites where we know there is some material that we must make sure we capture.
Yeah, I mean, the whole the question around diversity of makers and making within our collection has been something that we've been really mindful of for quite a while now, and you know, we're anyway looking at how we can shift that going forward. I mean, like most collections, our collection is a document of an organisation, and I'm thinking of that the time that it was formed, because it is a contemporary collection. It is that it's never been a survey, it's a snapshot. So there's a kind of whole story around that anyway, which this problem about, you know, what how you classify objects and the status of objects in the collection. That's something that we are really going to look at, because there's a clear pattern between what's in primary collection and what's in our handling collection, our education collection, and what the profile of those different makers and the profile of that making and work is. But in terms of the kind of what's gone on through this period of lockdown, and there has been a lot, you know, the whole Black Lives Matter has come, you know, much more to a front of people's consciousness. So that is something that we are looking at within this rapid response kind of project. So I think that in a way there's an element where we want to, you know, look at makers who are responding to the kind of lockdown and the COVID-19 in terms of the subject of their work. But what we're also interested in is you know, everything that's been going on during this time, and that makers that have and work that's emerged during this time that really is reflecting the breadth of what's been going on, which is about Black Lives Matters. It is about the kind of climate emergency as well. It is about you know, neighborhood and community, and there's lots of themes that are completely embedded within a COVID-19 lockdown acquisition theme, I think.
Is there, for both of you, is there anything that has come across your desk, as it were, that has been a surprise to you, given the how you approached framing the collecting in these particular areas?
Oh, do you know what? I don't think, off the top of my head, there's not actually. I mean, I think that maybe I think what's been really good, not necessarily a surprise, but I think the impact of, like, you know, Grayson's yes. Art Club has been just phenomenal, and I think it's kind of really kind of amplified a lot of the work that's been happening, you know, what's been happening around making and everyday making, and it's kind of really kind of, yeah, like I said, like amplified for a lot of people that are happening. And Noel Fielding's art club as well, he runs an art club on Instagram, and a lot of the work that Jeremy Deller's been doing along with Fraser Muggeridge, and you know, taking out of the gallery. I mean, what he's doing is about fly posting, and he's long been doing those programs, those projects, but that's really come to more become more visible now, I think. So yeah. Not necessarily surprising, but I can see that this is kind of, it's kind of like a whole, it feels like a bit of a movement almost, that's a bit of a culture shift.
Yeah, I mean, because I would say that, you know, those people who've responded quite emotionally to what's gone on, it's not that they've written a very kind of like a dull diary about how today, you know, I'm at home and I just went, you know, I went out for my 40 minutes walk, and they've responded really quite emotionally, and that means actually in many ways quite artistically to what they're experiencing as well. So as I said at the start, we have had those people who've just, you know, recorded interviews with, say, college conference managers about what it's like to have no visitors to Cambridge, and that's quite a matter of fact. This is how we're doing the day job differently. But then there are other people who show how they're doing their day job very differently. So the chaplain of St Catherine's College wrote the most beautiful hymn. I mean, that's art, you know, that's art as well as a job for Holy Week. Or a nurse at the hospital who wrote some poetry about the first person, you know, who she cared for, who died. And people taking photographs, which are really rather beautiful. I mean, they're not photographers, they are scientists or whatever, but their response to it, their personal response, is not just to write something dull, and it's to actually to respond emotionally and very artistically to what's going on. And that, I think that is going to be of interest to people long term. And indeed one of the people who approached us did specifically mention Grayson Perry's art club, and she enclosed a photograph of her of a mask she'd done, a self-portrait, you know, which looked lovely, and we said, oh yes, we'd love that. Not sure whether she's going to give us the original. She was more interested in the photograph, but you know, yes, inspired in that way. This is me expressing myself and how I feel.
Yeah.
Or a little child who drew, you know, just who's only tiny, but he drew a picture of his, spontaneously apparently, a picture of his family kind of brim full of virus and trapped inside a cage, presented it to his mum and dad. Therapy, you know.
Yeah. I think it has. I think there's been a real empowering of people to be creative during this. I think that people have been nervous about saying, you know, oh, I can't draw or I can't make, but there's been something about actually people being at home and realizing that they can, and actually anybody can. And I think that's where the kind of the Grayson Perry Art Club has really changed a lot of views on you know, the fact that everybody can be creative. And that, you know, is something, like I said, you know, with our collecting about the power of the everyday making and how that's really grown and gained profile is something that's of interest. But actually one thing that I didn't mention that also looking to build around the collection is the fact the scrub hubs and the way that making has kind of gained this real status and that kind of sense of community and kind of, yeah, community national effort around kind of making scrubs, making face masks as well, and how we can document some of that through the collection as well, because we're not a social history collection, so it is about from the making point of view.
I suppose as we advance into more uncharted territory, I guess, as a society and as a global community, what advice do you think you might give to another institution embarking on any kind of reactive collecting project in the coming months?
Well, you've got to be pragmatic. I mean, you start from looking at what resources you have and you take it from there. You know, I've got 2 hours a week. What am I going to do? Kind of, you know, and you've also, I think we also just felt we had to be pragmatic there, but we have a duty to this material that we take as employees of an internationally renowned research library to put structures in place or to give ourselves the best opportunity to do the best by this stuff long term. So that doesn't just mean saying, hey, send me your stuff. You have also got to think about how you're going to appraise it, how you're going to process it, what you need by way of copyright permission or clearance, or what you need by way of metadata, what you need by way of information about the sensitivity of this stuff, what your ethical approach is, so that you can actually 5 years from now, 10 years from now, say this is the collection, as opposed to it's just continuing to be so ephemeral that the other side of this, in 6 months from now, it has all to be just, you know, deleted, because you can't actually do anything with it, not even to the point of being able to copy it to take it into a preservation repository. I suppose that's what I've learned. I mean, as has, of course, a lot of people, all those people who said we can't do this, we can't do that because we don't have the perfect solution. Well, history's completely speeded up, hasn't it? You know, and everything's suddenly as possible as it can be, because you just got to make some progress. Just get on with it. Just do what you can. Yeah,
I think what I've learned is be really clear why you're doing it, and what in a way what you want. And get on and do it, but also don't take any shortcuts. So though it's rapid, it's kind of rapid response and kind of fleet of foot acquisitions. I think it's about not cutting corners. So one of the key things that I was getting in place was making sure that all those documents that we send out about transfer of title, you know, maker statements, I mean, that whole kind of raft of formal documents around any acquisition, that they are there, and anybody acquiring anything as a kind of rapid response, they still send that and we capture that. So exactly, you have the permissions, but you have the story as well, captured at the time, which is why we wanted it.
Thank you both very much indeed for all of your time and your thoughts and conversation. It's been a real pleasure. A sincere thanks to everybody who's spoken to us over the weeks. Thank you also to the UKRG committee. So please, everybody, keep in touch. Let us know if you'd like to revisit any of the subjects that we've covered, or if you'd like us to come back and push on with some more insights. Anyway, thank you very much again, and we'll speak again soon.